wait a moment for everything to load in to make sure everything is working, because sometimes it's not working and we want to make sure it is. So let's just make sure everything is working, that the audio is on, because we've had that problem before. So let's just make sure our audio is making sense. Okay, I think we're okay. I think we are all right. Don't touch that, Pippin. So, if you've not been here before, you notice I'm in the house instead of in the great outdoors with the animals. It's because it's ridiculous outside. It's ridiculous. Windy, cold, occasional sleet. We're not doing that. So that's why we're inside today, because it's really gross. It's gross out there. It's incredibly, incredibly gross out there. So we are just going to make sure. Okay, yes, we are good with our audio. So we are going to get started now that we know our audio is working. So welcome back to Andersen Acres. I am Leanne, and I have a small hobby farm in central Canada. It's cold as heck here right now, but that's fine. It'll be colder. It's only the end of November. Wait till January and I'll be complaining about 40 below. And then in February, I'll be complaining that it's been 40 below for 3 weeks. So it'll be fun, I promise. So every Friday, I do a live stream where we chat about farm life, animals, and daily chaos on the property, and all those things people think they understand about hobby farming, but really don't. And because this is the 4th Friday of the month, you know what that means? It's Myth Day. It's where we take one of the big, persistent, stubborn myths that people always bring up about hobby farming, and we break it down in detail. These aren't controversies. These aren't, well, technically it depends. No. On the 4th Friday of the month, we talk about myths that are verifiably, undeniably, repeatedly false. No gray areas, no both sides, things that are just not true. Okay? But they get passed around because somewhere along the line, somebody said it, usually because they hoped it was true, not because they actually thought it was true, because they hoped it was true. And if enough people repeat something, we all start believing it. But just because someone said it doesn't mean it's true. Okay, so these are things that people honestly do believe. Nobody has bad intentions in regards to these specific myths I talk about. These are not bad intentions. It's just things people honestly believe, but the evidence says otherwise. Now, before we jump in, I do want to say this. I know most of you can't catch this live stream at this specific day and time, and I know most of you watch on the replay. I am very glad you do so. I do it live just because it's so much easier than doing a pre-recorded video, because I don't have to edit anything out or anything. I just, sit and talk. So, excellent. If you can make it live, great. If you can't, that's also okay. Friday afternoons are weird. Most people are still at work or picking up kids or doing errands or, living normal lives. People have normal lives, not me, but most people have normal lives. So if you're watching on the replay, thanks for stopping by anyway. And feel free to watch this whenever you can, whether it's morning coffee or Saturday late at night after your kids go to bed, whatever. Okay? Doesn't matter. So if you are watching on the replay, drop your questions in the comments below, and I will add them to our Q&A section later, okay? I do read them all. I can't respond to every single one, but your comments can help determine what we cover in future live streams, and they will definitely influence what questions I add to the Q&A section. If you're here live, when we get to the Q&A section, you can drop a question in the comments, in the chat. But I know most of you are going to watch it on the replay, and that's completely fine. So let's move on to today's myth. And this one is one of my absolute favorites because of how confidently people say it, even though it's not true. And that myth is, you can tell a chicken's sex by the shape of the egg. Pointy eggs supposedly hatch out roosters, and the rounder eggs supposedly hatch out hens. Sometimes you'll hear the myth the other way around, Okay, depending on who's telling it. So sometimes people will tell you the round eggs are roosters and the pointy ones are hens. It depends who's telling it because there's no truth to it either way. But people swear that this was taught by someone's grandmother, or that it's old farm knowledge, or the farmers back in the day used to do this. And because it gets repeated so often, people assume there must be some truth to it. But no, absolutely not. In fact, my great-grandparents were hatching eggs on the Canadian prairies. Yes, it was cold. They did the best they could. But they were hatching eggs under the stairs in the Canadian prairies, and they would have told you if they were still alive, which they're not. But if they were still alive today, they would tell you there is no way to determine whether that baby's going to be a boy or girl before that little egg hatches. They would tell you that. Okay, so this myth is 100% false. If this myth were a cake, it would collapse in the oven. So this one's not true. But today we're going to break down this myth from every angle. Why people believe it, why it's false, what actually determines egg shape, and what actually determines chick sex. And we'll talk about why this myth has survived for so long. And we're going to do it in a straightforward, friendly, farm chat sort of way. We're not going to get carried away. Okay, we're just going to talk. And yes, I will tell a few stories from my farm and maybe from a friend or two's farm. And I always like to talk about my own animals, so we're going to do that a lot. Okay, we are. I live with real animals, and they do ridiculous things on a daily basis, so I can't help but talk about them. At least Shadowfax is currently in his pen. Thumbs up on that one. At least I think he was currently in his pen 10 minutes ago. Has that changed? Possibly. Okay. So let's start with the basics of this myth. Egg shape has nothing to do with the sex of the chick inside the egg. None. Zero. Zilch. The two things are not connected in any biological way. Egg shape is determined by the hen, specifically by her genetics, her age, and the shape of her reproductive tract. Some hens just have a reproductive tract that makes a different shaped egg. That's just the way it is. Some lay perfect little ovals, perfect little eggy shapes. Some lay eggs that are kind of like a marble. Some lay eggs with ripples or ridges. Some have wrinkled shells, and some produce eggs that look like they were sketched by a distracted toddler. They're chickens, man, not machines. But every pattern of egg shape belongs to the hen, not the chick. Okay, the chick had nothing to do with the shape of that egg. The chick's sex is determined the moment the egg is fertilized, based on chromosomes. And the mother is the one who determines it. In humans, it's the father. But in chickens, it's the mama. Okay, not the father. In chickens, males are ZZ. Okay, genetically. Are they boy or girl? Boys are double Z. And females are ZW. And the hen provides either the Z or the W. Okay? One or the other. So it's the hen that will pass down that gene because Papa's only passing down Zs. Okay? Mama is passing down either a Z or a W. And if it's a Z, it's a boy. If it's a W, it's a girl. But none of that has anything to do with whether the egg looks like a football or a jelly bean. One of the best ways to illustrate that myth is to look at how hens lay. When you have a flock of mixed breed hens, or even a flock of the same breed, you learn very quickly who lays what egg. Okay? Every hen has a signature style, kind of like handwriting. If you've got 3 hens that lay 3 eggs in similar shades of brown, but one of them makes eggs that are long and pointy, and one of them makes perfectly oval eggs, and one makes really squat little round ones, that pattern stays fairly consistent. If you hatch those eggs, sometimes you'll get roosters and sometimes you'll get hens, but they'll all come from different egg shapes. If the myth were true, every pointy egg layer, every single hen that laid pointy eggs, would always produce roosters. And every hen that laid only round eggs would always produce hens. If that were true, commercial hatching facilities would be using this to figure out which hens they wanted to keep in their facility to lay eggs. Okay, if it worked, you better believe big business would be using it. Big chicken or big chicken egg in this case. But every single time you get a mixed basket, you take all those round eggs and you put them in the incubator, there's a good chance, a good percentage of them are going to be roosters. That's just the way it works. And it's every single time. There have been informal experiments online where people have tried to sort eggs by shape and hatch them separately. And every single time, the result is actually random. Every single person who actually documents all the steps, like the proper steps, and isn't just telling you, oh, yeah, I did it and I got all hens. Every person who actually documents it properly gets a mixed bag. 50-50 sometimes 70-30, depends. Just like nature intended. It's a mixed bag. So no, egg shape doesn't predict which sex is going to hatch out of that egg. The chick is the chick. Okay? It's just like the shape of your apple doesn't really determine how it's going to taste most of the time. It's just the shape. So why do people believe this myth? There are a few reasons, actually. Okay, and they all make sense once you look at how farm myths are spread. First, people love shortcuts. I do. Don't we all love a good shortcut? Something that makes our lives easier and that we are able to do so that we don't have to spend so much time doing the thing we don't want to do. In this case, it's hatching out a bunch of roosters. We don't want to do that. So this myth gives us a way to have a little shortcut and to only put eggs in the incubator that are hens. And people love the idea that you can look at something and instantly know the answer instead of having to wait. We're not good at the waiting thing. Humans are bad at waiting. But this particular myth saves time, it feels intuitive, and sounds like it came from wisdom passed down through the generations. And on a farm, old wisdom gets repeated a lot, even when we know it's wrong, and even when we know it's not old wisdom, even when we know that old wisdom is just something Joe made up yesterday. Okay? We still keep repeating it because we want it to be true. Now, some of the old wisdom is incredibly valuable. Things like how to tell when a goat is going into labor or how to read a rooster's body language. All of that stuff has been passed down through generations of farm people. But some of the stuff is complete fiction that just kind of stuck around because it was catchy. Now, the second reason this myth hangs around is because it feels scientific. People look at a pointy egg and think, ah, yes, this is a more aggressive shape. Surely that means a rooster. Or they see a round egg and think, softer, gentler. That's probably a lady chicken. This is what happens when humans apply personality traits to inanimate objects. An egg is an inanimate object. And we do it all the time. We even say cars have grumpy faces, but it's a car. No, it doesn't. But applying personality logic to eggs doesn't change their biology. It's fun, but it's not true. Now, another reason this myth survives is the human brain has a talent for noticing patterns. And it also does that where patterns don't exist. Okay? Our brains are really good at patterns and they look for patterns constantly. Even when that pattern is like, I'm not here. We still do it. So if someone hatches a bunch of pointy eggs and ends up with a lot of roosters, we remember that. Our brain goes, there's a connection. It's the post hoc ergo propter hoc thing all over again. Which is basically two things happen at roughly the same time, therefore they must be connected. But just because you had a bunch of pointy eggs and you got a bunch of roosters doesn't mean they had anything to do with each other. We would like them to. We would like to be able to observe that kind of causality in real time, but that's not the way the world works. If someone hatches round eggs and gets mostly hens, we'll also remember that in the same vein. But if they hatch pointy eggs and mostly get hens, we'll just forget it. We'll be like, well, that wasn't true, and move on with our day. But if we confirm something, we tell everybody, right? We're like, oh my God, this worked for me. But the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people who it didn't work for have already moved on with their life, right? They're already not doing it. So it wasn't true. You just think it was. And this whole thing of discarding what we don't really feel like remembering, that's called confirmation bias. Humans remember the hits and forget the misses, especially when a myth feels true and satisfying. Another thing that keeps this myth alive is how casually it gets passed along. Someone will say, oh, my neighbor did this and it worked. Or my grandpa always sorted eggs that way and he swore by it. But what we rarely see is anyone actually writing this down. In fact, I have not been able to find anyone who wrote this down prior to about 10 years ago. Okay, actually wrote it down. Well, I think I heard my dad say it, and I think he heard his dad say it. Somebody usually writes these things down. I know that my great-grandparents wrote down literally everything. Okay, so did my grandparents. When they were living on the farm, they wrote down literally everything because those little details could make or break your farm. They wrote it all down. And no one seems to have written this one down. Why? Why do they write down everything else but not this one? There's got to be a reason. And that reason is that it's not true. Okay? Very few people were recording, okay, I set 12 pointy eggs and here's the exact number of hens and roosters that hatched. I mean, people write that down, but they don't always share that. If somebody had consistently seen that they were hatching roosters every time they put pointy eggs in the incubator or under a hen, they would absolutely have written that down and they would have started using that on their farm because everybody wants to hatch more hens than roos. That's just the way it is on a farm. We want the girls because they have multi-purpose and boys don't have that many reasons to be around. A lot of them end up in freezer camp and we don't need that many in freezer camp. So if we could hatch more girls, that'd be great. All of us would hatch more girls. But without actual recorded information, records, human memory will happily fill in the gaps in whatever way feels satisfying. So when we can't find the information, we just make it up. It just makes sense. We're human, right? Like, I can't find this information, I'm just going to make it up. And we don't make it up intentionally. But what we do is we double down on what we thought. We're like, well, I can't find anything that says it doesn't happen, but it's difficult to prove a negative. So you're looking for something to confirm the positive, and there isn't. There isn't. I've looked. Trust me, I spent a lot of time looking because if this one had worked, it would have been great. So if Grandpa really wanted to believe that his egg sorting trick worked, he would have written it down. If he actually had information about that, he would have written it down. But what he would quietly do is round the numbers in his head, not even on purpose. He would often do it just because it felt like the right thing to do. You start confirming your own bias by carefully rounding those numbers down every time, right? Or forgetting the groups that were all roosters when you hatched the round eggs. You just forget. That's not dishonesty. That's just how our brains work. It's not that Grandpa was being dishonest. It's that you just discard the information after a while. You just do. It's charming. This trait is charming when it comes to stories. It's less charming when you're trying to talk about what's biologically true. Okay? It becomes much more difficult. But now let's go into some detail about how egg shape is actually formed, because understanding that makes the myth fall apart even faster. Inside the hen, the reproductive tract has multiple parts, okay? It has the magnum, the isthmus, which I can't say today. Sorry, my tongue is a little swollen today and I can't say words. But then you have the shell gland. The shell gland is where that egg spends most of its time, building the shell over many hours. It's not an instant process. That part of the tract has a specific shape and thickness, which affects how the egg comes out. As hens age, their shell glands can become a little less firm, leading to longer or irregular shaped eggs. But it's important to note that shell gland, where that shell is being built, that is after the gender of the chick has already been determined. Okay? That's happening later. If we zoom in even further, the shell itself is a layer of calcium carbonate laid down over a membrane in a spiral pattern as the egg slowly moves through the shell gland. The pressure, the timing, and even the brief pause while the hen's body is busy doing other things can affect the final contour of the shell. That's why you'll sometimes get those quirky eggs with the ripples, or one with a slightly thicker shell than the last one. None of this has anything to do with the embryo's sex. The chick could be male, female, or even not fertilized at all, and the shell would still form from the outside in, shaped by the hen's body and her current condition, not by what might be growing inside. When hens are young, they sometimes produce odd, bumpy eggs as their system kind of works out the kinks. In other words, the egg shape is a reflection of the hen's biology, not a reflection of the chick's sex chromosomes. Also, different breeds of egg lay different shapes. Mediterranean breeds like leghorns tend to lay longer, pointier eggs. Orpingtons and Australorps tend to lay slightly rounder eggs. Easter eggers are wild cards. You get everything from pointy to oval to eggs that look like they can't decide what they want to be. If egg shape predicted chick sex, certain breeds would be producing almost entirely roosters or entirely hens. And that simply doesn't happen. It has never happened. So, if you really want to see this myth fall apart in real time, you can do a tiny backyard experiment yourself. This one's easy. Take one hen, so you need 2 hens for this experiment, but you want one hen who lays pointier eggs and one hen who lays rounder eggs, something you can observe with your eye, something where you can look at that and say, yep, that's Mabel's egg because it's a marble. So do that. Okay. Mark a few eggs from each hen, set them in the incubator, and write down which is which. Put them in separate incubators if you can, because you can keep them separate, entirely separate. Don't try to will the results in a certain direction. That's not what we're doing. Just hatch them, keep them separate, brood them in separate brooders, okay, so you can keep track of who's who, and wait until they're old enough to tell who's a boy and who's a girl. What you'll end up with is a fairly random scatter of pullets and cockerels from both hens. You might get a run of roosters from the round eggs or a run of pullets from the pointy ones. That happens, right? The law of large numbers says eventually you're going to have a dozen eggs that are all roosters regardless of shape. And randomness is exactly the point. Nature isn't reading the shell-shaped chart on Facebook, okay? Nature is just creating the egg. It doesn't care what your weird neighbor posted on Facebook yesterday. It doesn't care. Because nature doesn't care about Facebook, let's be honest. But now let's address the bigger statement where people sometimes defend this myth, like why they do that. So often what you hear is, well, the old farmers used to do it, so it must have worked. No. What old farmers did was candle eggs to check for development, tap eggs to listen for movement near hatch, and keep meticulous track of which hens produce strong chicks, because that was their main concern. Are these good chicks? The selected hens for genetic traits, so what they did is they basically picked for things like health and vigor and productivity. That's what they wanted out of a hen, right? They wanted a hen that would give them good, strong chicks, chicks that had health, vigor, and productivity. Egg shape wasn't part of the equation because it didn't matter, okay? Egg shape never mattered. They knew that. So that's why they didn't write down the egg shape. That's when you look at old farmers' log books, and they kept meticulous logs. There's not a space, they don't write down egg shape because it didn't matter. They knew it didn't matter, okay? Productivity mattered. Hatch rate mattered. Disease resistance mattered. Egg color, sometimes if they were having eggs for a specific market. Egg size, yes. Egg size absolutely mattered because a lot of people wanted larger eggs, so they would select hens that laid bigger eggs. Egg shape, then they knew it was unpredictable and they knew it didn't matter. So they didn't pay attention to that in their logs. And since we're talking about what old farmers used to do, let's discuss the obvious truth. Old farmers did not have access to DNA testing or any of our modern ways of determining sex at the earliest stages of life. And when it comes to chicks in ovum, in the egg, it is DNA testing. That's the only way to really know. They certainly did not know about chromosomes because we hadn't gotten that far in the science yet. They worked with what they did have, and that was observation. And when you're observing, sometimes you do get the wrong idea. That happens to all of us. Sometimes when you're looking at something, you think A equals B, but it didn't. And when you're in the field, sometimes an old farmer's truth just doesn't hold up to scrutiny because you just didn't have the information you needed. But let's be honest, the egg shape thing doesn't really exist in old farmer manuals. It doesn't. It's not there because they didn't care. Now, another thing to keep in mind, There's no way to know the sex of a chick before it happens unless you were to DNA test an ovum, which nobody's going to do that. That's ridiculous. Okay? But there's no secret trick. There's no old method that farmers had. There's no folk test involving eggs or strings or pendulums or moon phases. None of this stuff lets you know the genetics of a chick before it hatches. You can't know the genetics of a chick unless you do DNA testing. That's the only reliable method. There's nothing that involves eyeballing or checking the shape or whatever other crazy method we've come up with lately, because we all want to hatch out hens instead of roos, but it's very, very flighty. You can't do it. Now, sometimes you will have a hen that is more likely to have daughters than sons, and she's worth some gold. But for the most part, it's going to be pretty close to even. Now, egg shape isn't the only version of this particular myth floating around. There are plenty of people who swear you can tell the gender of the chick in the egg by using a string and a ring dangling over the egg, or using a pendulum, or how fast the chick's heart is beating during incubation. People actually get stethoscopes and measure the heartbeat. And sometimes people even talk about, well, if you sit the egg on a flat surface, which way the egg tilts will determine the sex of the chick. That just determines where the chick is laying in the egg. It doesn't matter. Okay? But all of these things follow the same pattern. They promise certainty where biology does not offer certainty. Okay? They sound mystical or clever or old-fashioned, which makes them appealing, because we like that stuff. That stuff is fun. But at the end of the day, if you test them in a way that doesn't let you cheat, the test results always drift back to the same random ratios that nature gives you on her own, meaning there was no point in doing all that extra work. So if egg shape doesn't matter for sex, what does matter when choosing eggs to hatch? Well, you want to look for things like shell quality. Shell quality matters. Cleanliness of the egg. Okay, I personally don't love throwing eggs that are covered in poop and muck into the incubator. Sometimes with ducks, you have no choice because ducks are filthy. I love them, but ducks are filthy. The goat is just outside this window here. So I get to watch a goat. She's looking at me. We're surrounded by windows. I have lots of windows in the living room. That's why I like the living room. Anyway, so shell quality, how clean the egg is, and the size actually do make a difference. You want eggs with strong, intact shells, not thin, chalky ones. You want eggs that are reasonably clean, not caked in manure or dirt. You want to avoid the extremes at both ends. You don't want those teeny tiny fairy eggs because they're not going to hatch well. They probably won't hatch at all. But you also don't want those big, giant double yolkers because those are twins, and twins never go well for anybody. So you want the middle of the road average egg. And yes, you want the average egg. You don't want the extremes. You don't want this egg is better because it's bigger. No, you want the average egg for that breed. Okay? Now, the fairy eggs and the double yolkers might be fun to look at, but they don't hatch well. So pick what's going to hatch well. Don't waste your time. None of the traits that determine whether an egg is a good quality egg for hatching have anything to do with the shape of the egg. Okay? And none of them tell you what's inside that egg. They don't tell you whether it's a hen or a roux in that egg. I wish they did. Okay? But those qualities do give you a better chance at getting a chick that's developing normally and hatching successfully. And that's where your energy is best spent. Okay? It is worth spending your time and energy on eggs that are actually going to hatch and not worrying about much else. Now, I do want to ground this particular myth in real farm experience because I think that's what makes these live streams fun. Here on Andersen Acres, I've seen eggs in every possible shape. I've seen eggs that look like someone pulled them like taffy. I've seen eggs that look like jelly beans, literally the jelly bean shape. I've seen eggs that were long and wrinkly, and even eggs that had funny little bulges on them, eggs that had calcium deposits all over them. And I've had hatch chicks from all those kind of eggs. I've gotten roosters from round eggs and hens from pointy eggs and vice versa. And once you've seen enough of those hatchings, you just shake your head every time someone brings up this myth. Because typically when people are bringing up this myth, it's people that have not hatched as much as they think they've hatched. They'll say, well, I've hatched dozens of eggs. Right, but there are those of us who have hatched thousands, who have literally over the years hatched out thousands of chicks, where we have hundreds of eggs incubating at the same time, or even thousands of eggs incubating at the same time. And when you're talking actually large numbers where you can actually observe a possible statistical difference, that statistical difference disappears. Now, at one point, just for my own curiosity, I did sit down with a clutch of eggs and I did the thing you're not supposed to do. I sorted them into pointy and round because I was really hoping there was some truth to this one. I marked them, I set them, and I wrote down which incubator they were in because I hatched in different incubators. I didn't tell anybody else what I was doing because I didn't want anyone to tell me it was dumb. It was dumb, but I didn't want anyone to tell me that, so I just didn't tell anybody I was doing it. Okay. Weeks later, once all the babies had feathered out enough to be able to tell who was a boy and who was a girl, I went back to my notes. And you know what the grand revelation was? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Both piles gave a mix of hen and ruse. There was no pattern beyond pure chance. The only thing that experiment taught me was that I'd wasted a perfectly good half hour drawing tiny shapes on eggs instead of cleaning a waterer. I could have been doing something else. I wasted time sorting them. I didn't need to do that. But I do want to talk about something else as well. I want to talk about why myths like this aren't harmless. They're not harmless. And I mean, we think they are. Like, who cares if somebody only hatches the round eggs? Not because, so the thing is, nobody's going to be hurt by believing that pointy eggs hatch roosters. But believing in incorrect biology can lead people to make poor choices regarding their animals. People may throw away eggs they assume will produce roosters when in fact those eggs can be perfectly good layers. Or they might be disappointed when their round egg pullet eggs hatch into a chorus of tiny little crowing machines, otherwise known as roosters. Or worse yet, they might assume they can control the chick ratio by sorting eggs and then blame the hens or the rooster when the ratio doesn't come up the way they wanted. And then they'll just start getting rid of their hens and roosters and getting new hens and roosters, trying to find ones that are doing it right, that are laying the right shaped eggs and where you get the right sexed babies out of the right shaped eggs. And then you end up with birds suffering for no good reason. The bird didn't do anything. Okay? So animal welfare is a big deal, and allowing a myth to influence the decisions you make can endanger animal welfare in this case. So that's where a harmless myth stops being harmless. If you're just chatting with a friend over coffee and joking about pointy eggs, that's one thing. Nobody cares about that. But when people start making real decisions about hatching and culling based on a trick that doesn't work, animals pay the price. Okay? Every time. Perfectly viable eggs get discarded. People become frustrated because the results don't match the promise. Sometimes they blame the rooster or the hatchery or even the hens themselves for giving bad eggs when the problem was never the birds to start with. The problem was the expectation. When we correct myths like this, we're not trying to ruin somebody's fun. We're trying to make sure the choices we make for our animals are grounded in reality. And while we're talking about ratios, let me say this. The rooster-hen ratio is a hatch that is always going to be random, okay? It's always going to be random. You can get a hatch with 1 hen and 9 roosters. You can get 8 hens and 2 roosters. You can get the perfect 50-50. Nature flips a coin, and sometimes nature likes chaos. Egg shape has nothing to do with the results. Nothing. And if you hatch long enough, you'll realize that. Now, I do want to expand a little bit on the psychological appeal of this myth because I think it's important to understand why it sticks around. Myths like this give people a sense of control. Farming, especially hobby farming, comes down to a lot of unknowns. Okay? You can do everything right and still have surprises. Things can still go wrong. You can care for animals meticulously and still run into problems. So when a myth offers an illusion of certainty, I know what's inside this egg, people want to believe it. It gives them a tiny sense of mastery. But false confidence isn't confidence at all. Knowing the truth even if the truth is we can't know until it hatches, gives you real stability. Letting go of this myth means accepting that parts of farming are genuinely uncertain. And that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. A lot of us really like certainty. Okay, we like answers. We like knowing what we're getting. But there's also something very honest and beautiful about saying, we'll see who you are when you hatch. And there's nothing wrong with it. You set the eggs, you control what you can. The temperature, the humidity, the turning, the nutrition of the parent birds. Then you wait. You just wait. You don't know who is inside, but you know you're giving each potential chick the best chance you can. There's a lot more integrity in that than in pretending you've outsmarted biology with a shell-shaped trick passed around on social media. And that's why these myth-busting live streams actually matter. Not because we're trying to shame anyone or to make them feel silly, absolutely not. But because we're trying to help people build healthier, more realistic expectations for their animals. When you farm based on reality instead of fiction, everything becomes easier. You don't get disappointed by things you assumed would happen. You don't get surprised by things you were not expecting. You don't build your plans based around magical thinking. Now I'd like to talk about what happens when a myth goes viral, because that's another way this one's around, okay? Someone on Facebook posts a picture of 2 eggs, one pointy, one round, and writes, "My grandmother always told me the pointy ones are roosters." The post gets shared 1,000 times. People comment with laughing emojis, or "This is so true, I've heard this my whole life." And suddenly, because a lot of people said it, it feels credible. But the number of people who believe something has absolutely no impact on whether it's true. Okay? Doesn't matter if 1 million people believe it if it's not true. 1 million people can believe a myth and it's still a myth. Now, before I move on to the Q&A section, I want to give one more farm example, because this is Andersen Acres after all, and I can never resist telling a real story. A couple of years ago, I had a hen who laid the most spectacular pointy eggs you've ever seen. They look like tiny little torpedoes, and I love them. If the myth were true, I'd have been drowning in roosters. But what did I get? A mix. Perfectly normal mix. She laid beautiful babies. I still have some of those babies. I don't have the hen anymore because she was old, but I do have some of her children. Jabba is one of her children. And yeah, he's a rooster who hatched out of a pointy egg, but his sisters also hatched out of pointy eggs. Just the way it goes. Shape didn't matter at all. The hen's egg signature mattered only as a way for me to identify which egg came from which bird. Nothing more. That's how I knew the eggs were hers. So what do you do when someone confidently tells you, "Oh, just set the round eggs if you want hens"? Well, you don't have to start a fight in the feed store aisle. There's no point. A simple, calm response like, "That one's actually been tested a lot and it doesn't work and I really wish it did," is usually enough. If they're curious, you can explain a bit about how the hen's body shape determines the egg, how her internal organs shape that egg. And then you can talk about how chick sex is determined at fertilization. If they're not curious, that's okay. It's not your fight. You can walk away knowing that your own decisions are based on real information and not wishful thinking. And if you're feeling especially spicy, you can always smile and say, "Well, my incubator didn't get that memo," because mine never did. My incubators did not get that memo. I would love if I could hatch round eggs and get girls. We can all use more girls, let's be honest. All right, let's move on to our Q&A portion of the live stream. This is one of my favorite parts of the stream because it lets me talk about the practical, everyday questions that people have about hobby farming and eggs and hatching, gardening and baking, and all the things we do here at Andersen Acres. And as always, if you're watching this on the replay, you can 100% drop your own questions in the comments. I add the best ones to future live streams. So let's dive into the questions I get all the time. First of all, can you hatch supermarket eggs? But they're not going to hatch. Okay, now I've done it. I've put eggs from the store as a lark. Now, occasionally you'll get 1 or 2 eggs hatching. That's true from grocery store eggs. But normally that's one, a mistake at the plant where there's an accidental rooster amongst the group, or two, they were marketed as fertile eggs. But even if they're fertile eggs, being refrigerated for that long does mean their fertility would go down anyway. So most store eggs are already unfertilized, and they're pretty much always refrigerated in North America. Without fertility and proper storage, nothing's going to develop anyway. So, do you have to wash the eggs before putting them in the incubator? No, and you generally should not. Washing eggs removes the bloom, which protects the egg from bacteria for the few weeks it takes the eggs to hatch. You don't want to remove anything that's important to that egg. So if you have to, you can use a dry cloth to try to wipe off some grime, but generally just leave it alone. What humidity should I use for chicken eggs? I like my humidity pretty low, but I live in a really humid area. I live between two huge lakes. It's always humid here. So I dry hatch, meaning I don't put any water in my incubator. So my humidity runs hopefully around 30%. And if it's getting up ahead of that, I like to throw a dehumidifier in the room because it's freaking humid here. If you live in like ducks just march past the window, the line. That's funny. That window, not that one. I've got 4 windows here. Anyway, not the point. If you live in a normal area that's not wicked humid like I am, you're probably looking at around 40% humidity. I know people will tell you to go higher, but generally I do 40. I like 40% for incubation and about like under 50 for hatching. That way the chicks don't drown. That's the biggest risk is in drowning your chicks. Do roosters have to mate with hens daily for the eggs to stay fertile? No. Once fertile, once she's been fertilized, a hen can generally lay fertile eggs for a couple of weeks. So she doesn't need him every day, which is good because he's probably got other ladies to please. Can cold eggs still hatch? In theory, yes, as long as they didn't freeze. Brief chilling does slow things down, but doesn't necessarily kill the embryo. If they've been at like fridge temperatures overnight, then they're probably going to hatch. But if they've been sitting out in the cold, you're probably best just to turn them into breakfast and hatch. Eggs you're more sure will hatch. How long can you store eggs before setting them to hatch? Generally, I tell people less than 7 days. Yeah, I've hatched eggs up to 3 weeks old. Fertility starts to drop off. So 7 to 10 days, if you want the best hatch rate. I would not put eggs older than that. Turn them into breakfast. We all need a good breakfast. Is it true that double yolks can't hatch? They can hatch, but it's rare, and it's almost always bad. Most double yolked eggs don't hatch because the chicks compete for space because each yolk represents a chick, and there's really not enough room in that egg for 2. So most of the time, they will crowd each other out, and you will not be able to hatch them all. But on rare occasions, people have hatched out a double yolked egg, and they've gotten 2 chicks out of the deal. Next question. Why do some eggs smell weird when you candle them? Okay, if you're candling your eggs that have been in an incubator and they smell weird, they didn't smell like that the last time you candled them, get rid of them. Be very careful. They're going to explode. And when I say explode, I mean they're rotten, and they're going to, and it's going to be really gross, and it's going to stink up your house. Get a plastic bag, put the plastic bag on your hand, grab that egg, pull the plastic bag over your hand, seal the plastic bag, and get it out of your house. Okay, because if that egg breaks in that bag, inside the house, it's still going to smell. So get that outside. That's an outside garbage thing. If it stinks, get it out of your incubator. Okay, because that rotten smell is bacterial contamination. And toss the egg. Get rid of it now. It stinks. And it's not going to be good. There's no live baby in there if it smells. Do chicks get stuck in the shell if your humidity is too low? Yeah, if your humidity has been way too low through the entire incubation period, your chick is probably going to get stuck. If your humidity is way too low during lockdown, your chick's probably going to get stuck. They need some moisture to move. So there's kind of a delicate balance between making sure they have enough moisture left in the egg to be able to rotate and move like they're supposed to, and making sure they've lost enough moisture that when they pip through that membrane, they don't get flooded with moisture and drown. So sometimes with your particular climate, it takes a little bit of practice to get it right. So yeah, it's okay if your first few batches don't go well. You're learning. It's all right. Are Easter eggers harder to hatch? No. Some people think that their shells are thicker and there's some variability that makes candling tricky, but I've never had trouble with Easter egger eggs. We have quite a few Easter eggers now. Do I need a rooster for hens to lay eggs? No. Your hens will continue to lay eggs for their entire life, even without a rooster. Okay, so if you take the rooster away, they're still going to be fine. You do not have to have a rooster to get eggs for eating. Eggs for hatching, yes, because the baby chicks need a papa. But you do not need a rooster if all you're going to do is eat the eggs. So if you live in an area where you can't have a rooster, but you still can have hens and you'd like a couple because you want breakfast, yeah, you can just have the hens. Next question was, why do some chicks pip in the wrong end of the egg? Because they got backwards. Sometimes your chick just flips around. They can still hatch. They might need a little bit of help. So if you notice a chick normally pips through at the fat end of the egg. So if you notice they're pipping through at that narrow end, you might just keep an eye. You might have to help them get out of the shell. Can you incubate eggs from pullets? Well, yes, if you want. Very young pullets, their eggs can be smaller and sometimes produce weaker chicks. So I wouldn't hatch the very, very first eggs. They're going to be working out the kinks. Some of those eggs won't have yolks yet, and some of those eggs are going to be too small. Some they're just going to be wonky eggs. It takes a couple weeks at least, usually a couple months, for a hen to work out her kinks. So have those eggs for breakfast until she works out the kinks. Do chicks need grit from day one? Chicks only need grit if you're feeding something other than chick starter. So we feed chick starter, so we never use grit. They need grit only when you're adding stuff that is not chick starter, because chick starter is already properly balanced with the proper amount of grit in it. Is it safe to use a heat lamp in the brooder? Heat lamps work, but they are a fire hazard. So no, it's not safe, but it's better than letting your chicks freeze to death. Heat plates or brooder plates are way better. But I mean, if you have a batch of chicks and all you've got is a heat plate, a heat lamp, putting a heat lamp up is better than letting them freeze because they need something. So ideally, don't use a heat lamp, but sometimes you work with what you've got, right? Okay, do goats really scream like humans? Yes. Yes, they do. And they're 3 a.m. and you'll think someone's murdering someone, and you'll go out there and the goat's just mad that she doesn't have a snack. But yes, they scream like humans. Can you keep a single duck? I wouldn't. One duck by itself. Ducks are really social. A lone duck is going to be miserable. So I would have more than one. Why do my chickens scratch up my garden? Because they're tiny little velociraptors with a passion for soil destruction. Because they're chickens. Because they're chickens. If you don't want them to scratch up your garden, you have to keep them out of your garden. You're not going to train your chickens not to scratch up your garden. They scratch. They roll in the dirt. That's what they do. They're chickens. Are Cayuga ducks always black? As ducklings, typically, yes. They might have a little bit of white smut on them here and there, but generally, yeah. As adults, they kind of are this really beautiful kind of like, beetles when they're really, really dark, but they shimmer green. That's the same thing with cayugas. They have this green shimmer to them. Might even have one or two silvery feathers as they age. So the couple of birds we have that are getting up there in age, you can see they've got like the occasional feather now that's not pure black. How long do fresh eggs last without washing? I don't use a fresh egg that's been on the counter without washing after 3 weeks, because that bloom absolutely stays intact for 3 weeks. After that, I mean, you can go 4 to 6 weeks, but after that, you do become a little, less certain. Also, eggs don't last that long around here. But for those first 3 weeks, the bloom is protecting them. That's what it's for. That bloom is there to protect eggs. What's the best beginner animal for a hobby farm? Chickens. Hands down. They're forgiving, inexpensive, and great teachers. They're also easy to acquire because there's chickens everywhere, and they're easy to rehome if you decide this isn't what I wanted. Okay? Start with something that's really, really easy to acquire and to rehome if it doesn't go well. Do miniature horses eat less food than full-size horses? Yes. They eat less total volume, but they still do have the same complexity of care. Okay? They still require farrier work and vet visits and training and feeding and fencing. They just have to eat less, but everything else is going to cost basically the same. Will ducks keep your pond clean? Well, no. Ducks will turn your duck pond into duck soup within a week. So if you have like a balanced pond that is kind of cleaning itself, then you might be okay, but otherwise be prepared to put a lot of filters in there and to clean those filters regularly. Ducks are gross. I love my ducks, but they're gross. Are turkeys really that fragile? As babies, yes. Seriously, babies are looking for a way to die, okay? It is not unusual to lose several turkeys when they're little, okay? When they're like under 6 weeks old. They just want to die. I don't know why, but they do. However, once they're adults, well, adults are hardy, clever, and full of attitude. I find that turkeys that live to be adults live a long time. Turkeys that do not live to be adults, we're looking for a way to die from day one. Just the way it is. Is it true that rabbits can die from fright? Yes. Prey animals can have heart attacks really easily. So this is true of your chickens as well. Prey animals, well, extreme stress can cause heart attacks and heart failure. They're fragile creatures. So try not to scare the heck out of your chickens and your rabbits and your goats. And try not to. Okay? It's not nice. A good friend of mine, her duck, Dragon, he was a lovely duck, Muscovy, and he had a heart attack because of fireworks. He panicked in the fireworks and he had a heart attack and died. And it was really tragic because Dragon was cool. We liked him. How do you keep eggs from freezing in winter? Collect often, insulate the nests if you can, and encourage hens to lay inside the coop and not in random places around the yard. Because if they're random places around the yard, they're going to freeze real fast and you're not going to know where they are anyway. Are incubators better than broody hens? Depends. Now, broodies are amazing. A broody hen is great. We love using silkies to hatch eggs. But incubators give you predictable timing and control, and because they're really consistent, you know that your eggs are going to hatch on a certain day or at least in a certain range. With broody hens hiding under the shed, it can be a little more dicey when they're going to hatch. You don't know. Why do some chicks come out with curled toes? A lot of different reasons. It could be improper incubation temperature. It could be a vitamin deficiency. It might be just plain bad genetics. Early treatment can help. So if your chick comes out with curled toes, take their foot to a flat piece of cardboard. I know that sounds ridiculous, but you're basically making them chicken shoes. So they have to walk with their feet like this. After about a week, take it off and they should be fine. Can you open the incubator during hatching? No, don't do that. Now, some people do it and they'll say, oh yeah, it's fine. But more people will tell you, yeah, if you open the incubator, it dries out the eggs because all the moisture wicks out. And it does. So try not to. Opening the incubator while the chicks are hatching causes humidity drops and it can shrink wrap your chicks. And you did all that hard work. You want the chicks. Can humidity be too high? Yes. Chicks can drown internally if the egg doesn't lose enough moisture. So you should not just continue to keep that humidity as high as you possibly can. I would aim for no higher than around 40% during incubation for most types of eggs. What's the biggest mistake beginners make with incubation? The biggest mistake is buying the absolute cheapest incubator you can find. Those incubators for $30 on Amazon, they do not work well. You will have some people like mine worked fine. You're the exception. Most of those incubators do not work well. My recommendation is to buy the best incubator you can afford and then follow the directions that incubator comes with. I'm partial to Brinsea. I love Brinsea incubators. However, they're wicked expensive. Most people are not going to be able to afford that out of the gate. But get the best incubator you can afford. How do you keep away predators without harming them? Okay, so if you don't want to hurt the predators, I get it. You want to secure your coop, use really great, strong wire, deep latches, electric fencing if you can, lock everything at dusk. Do not open it until after the sun is in the sky. We use livestock guardian dogs, and they're a great deterrent. Every once in a while, they have to do more than deter. So I recommend livestock guardian dogs, that does sometimes result in a predator not walking away. No, I don't love it. I mean, you never take pleasure in it, but I mean, it's the coyote or chickens. I know which one I'm picking. So, do chickens get bored? Yeah, if they're in a small space with nothing to do. But if they have like perches and gates and dust bathing areas and dirt to scratch in and safe things to peck at, they're fine. They don't need a million toys. Now, if you want to do a chicken swing or a xylophone because it makes you happy, do that. But the chickens don't need a xylophone to be entertained. They don't need a bunch of mirrors. They don't need a swing. But do give them a couple of things so that they're not standing there staring at you all day. Because if they're standing there staring at you all day, they're very, very bored. So give them something to do. How do you keep your garden safe from chickens? We don't. The chickens are always in the garden. And I love them for cleanup in the fall because they take down all the growth. But if you want to keep your chickens out of your garden, you have to keep your chickens out of the garden. You have to put fencing or you have to lock up the chickens. You have to do something. Is it expensive to bake with fresh eggs? No. I mean, we get them from our backyard. We're not going to talk about how much it costs to raise chickens. We'll talk about that a different day. But I don't find it's not expensive. Fresh eggs are better. I like them. Fresh eggs actually improve the taste and texture of your baked goods. So I prefer fresh eggs. It's more expensive than the factory eggs that you get at the grocery store, but not so much more expensive that I would hesitate to buy fresh eggs, even if I didn't have chickens of my own. I would still buy fresh eggs. Do brown eggs taste better than white eggs? No. I know people think they do, but the taste of your egg has everything to do with the hen's diet and nothing to do with the color of egg she's laying. Typically, people who are raising colorful layers, your brown eggs, your pink eggs, all those eggs, people who are raising those birds tend to have a higher quality feed than factory farms that are raising strictly white layers for the grocery store. That's why people think brown eggs taste better. But a hen that lays brown eggs and a hen that lays white eggs, if they are fed the same diet, the eggs will taste identical. Why do my cakes sink in the middle? You're not. Two things. It's possible you're not baking them long enough, so you're taking them out before they're cooked. You also might be putting in too much of your leavening agent, your baking powder, your baking soda. There's another possibility that you might be opening your oven door too much. Generally, you do not want to open your oven door a bunch of times when you're baking. If it's supposed to bake for 40 minutes, you really shouldn't open the oven before 35 minutes. You want to let the baking happen. Okay, so stop opening the oven. Can gardening really lower your food bill? That depends on how you garden. So it depends on if you're vigilant about gardening, if you plant things you're actually going to eat. So if you hate eggplant, don't plant a bunch of eggplant because you're not going to get any return on that. You're going to be like, oh, that's pretty. So definitely plant where you're going to eat. And you want to avoid plants that are high input or that are really high maintenance. The higher maintenance something is, the less likely you are to maintain it. And if you don't maintain it, it dies. And if it dies, you don't get any food. So it's only worth it if you're easy to maintain, there's something you'll actually eat, and if you actually are going to pay attention to your garden once in a while. Okay? Not all of us want to pay attention to the garden. What's the easiest garden crop for beginners? Beans, lettuce, or radishes. Zucchini too, but zucchini, you plant a couple of zucchini plants and suddenly you have 600 zucchinis. Okay, so back off on the zucchini until you know you're going to use the zucchini. But radishes, lettuce, and beans. Green beans, wax beans, they grow really, really well and really, really fast. So definitely think about growing those if you don't have a ton of experience with gardening. And radishes grow almost automatically, okay, almost by accident. So radishes are pretty easy as well. And lettuce grows quick. Okay, you'll know very quickly if your lettuce is even going to be lettuce. Can you freeze eggs? Yes, but not in the shell. If you want to freeze your eggs, crack them into a bowl, whisk them so they're scrambled, and then put them in like ice cube trays, freeze them. And then once they're solid, put them in a bag or a container, and you have like one egg per ice cube tray. It works wonderfully. These are really great for baking and for winter cooking. I wouldn't like just fry them that way, but for baking, they're fantastic. That wraps up our Q&A segment. I'm looking at the time. I do have to go. So whether you're here live or watching on the replay later, thank you for being a part of this community. I absolutely love diving into your questions every week, and your curiosity keeps these streams fun, warm, and lively. If you didn't hear your question today, feel free to leave it in the comments or send me a message on Facebook, and I will add your question to the rotation. I pull new ones every single week, so let me know in the comments or on Facebook. I am on Facebook Messenger. But now I really do need to be at the end because now we've been going for more than an hour and I've got to get going. So the myth that you can tell a chicken's sex by its egg shape is one of the easier myths to debunk because there's simply no evidence for it. No one's ever actually recorded multiple experiments in a row, repeatable experiments in a row that showed that this happens. Okay? None. It is a charming idea, a convenient idea, and I wish it was true. It's even comforting, but it's pure fiction. Egg shape comes from the hen, not the chick. Chick sex is determined at fertilization, not by the shape of the egg. And there is no method on earth, no trick, no folk test, no passed down family secret that lets you know what the chick is before it hatches, except for DNA. And we're not all going to grab all our partially developed eggs and DNA test them. First of all, it's expensive and it's ridiculous, and you're already mostly through the process. So it's dumb. So we're not going to do that. So no matter what you've heard, no matter what's repeated on every Facebook chicken group you're in, it's, not true. Okay? It is not true. It doesn't matter if someone swears their grandmother told them something. I mean, my aunt, when I was little, told me that chocolate milk came from brown cows. She was not correct. Okay? So just because your grandmother or your aunt or your aunt's friend from middle of nowhere, Texas, told you something doesn't mean anything, okay? The truth is still the truth. So as someone who runs a real hobby farm with real animals, real eggs, real hatches, real escapes, real mud, I hate mud, and real chaos, I will always try and tell you the truth, even when the truth is less magical than the myth. Because reality is better. It helps us make better decisions. It's more interesting. It's more grounded. And it leads to better care for the animals we love. That's about it for me here today at Andersen Acres. If you're watching this on the replay, go ahead and drop your questions in the comments now. I always read them, and they do help shape our topics every week. If you want to know what life is really like on a hobby farm, the escapes, the silliness, the unpredictability, and the heartfelt joy, then stick around. We have new videos every day and new live streams every Friday. And we always have a new animal doing something ridiculous. We'll see you tomorrow.